Hello and welcome back to the Futurism at JHU podcast. Today I'm joined with Ricardo and Max, and today's topic is virtual and augmented reality, also known as AR and VR. So, to get the conversation started, one idea that I had in terms of the future of AR is it stems from the movie Ready Player One and also the book Otherworld, which are probably two of my favorite sci-fi books and movies. And basically, the idea is, a decade from now or a couple of decades from now, we've created this hyper-realistic AI, or not AI, VR, where in Otherworld, it's actually this neural implant where it basically tricks your body or your brain into thinking that you're in this landscape. So whatever happens in that virtual landscape is actually, your brain thinks it's actually happening. So it's impossible to distinguish between reality and the virtual world, besides, of course, like your avatars and stuff. And then in Ready Player One, it's kind of the same idea, but in this case, they're not actually like hacking into your brain. They're just, it's like a super hyper-realistic like VR headset and like haptic like feedback and like full-on like tracksuits, and you're in this hyper-realistic virtual world where you can do anything and be anyone. And obviously, there's some really interesting consequences in both movies and books, which I'm not going to spoil it for you because I highly recommend watching Ready Player One and reading the book Otherworld. But it's a really interesting world because it kind of just changes how we live. Because why live in reality when you could live in your dream world, So I'm curious what you guys think of that. Like, is this something we're going to see in the next 10 years where people are just going to be going to virtual reality to live in virtual reality rather than the real world?
I think it's kind of already happening now, on a very, very small scale. We look at how much technology has sort of taken like how much attention technology has taken progressively, right? And that started with the implementation of TVs in people's households, and that just sort of grew and grew into the point where we have phones and social media, right? Like I read something somewhere that was like filters are replacing makeup, right? Things like that are like your neighbors are now followers instead, right? Instead of like just different things we value. Those things are sort of less of the things that we value are happening in the physical tangible world, and more things are being valued in the digital realm. And at some point we're going to cross that sort of threshold where we tip into the digital world, where basically everything we do is going to be everything we do and everything we value is going to be in the digital world, and nothing in the physical world is going to really matter, which is kind of interesting and also terrifying, because thinking about the context of living in a virtual world, humans have complete control, right? So we are essentially gods in that world. Whereas in the physical world, we are limited by, so many things. Whereas in a virtual world, we are not. However, humans have this tendency of just messing things up in general, right? Like, that's just how we are. So it's really scary placing that much power over people's lives in the hands of ultimately people and computers. Right? So I think that while we are seeing, I think the change is inevitable. I think it's really important to keep a lot of core values of the physical world very, very similar to the digital world, if that makes sense, as we transition into it.
Oh, that's such a good point. I didn't even think about that. Like, we spend most of our day like on our computers and phones, and that's, in a sense, that's not the real world. That's, I guess, the digital world that we've created.
It's the onset of like what AR and VR are going to like become, right?
Yeah, you're right. Like, we're kind of, I guess, like catapulting ourselves into like a fully like virtual / digital world,
Right, yeah.
which is, I don't know, I like personally
Sorry.
although I'm like a technology enthusiast, I also like reality. Like, I'm the kind of person who doesn't want to spend too much time on social media, or like limit my screen time and stuff like that, and try to like get outside into nature and like talk with people in real life. So it kind of worries me in a way, because I personally like, I think humanity is better off not like going fully virtual. um I don't know, that's just that's kind of where I stand. I want to hear what you guys think, like, because in the end, like, virtual reality is virtual reality, and like the real world is real, and I'd rather be spending my time in the real world. I think it's a really cool technology, but it's also something that maybe it's also these books have kind of like
Yeah.
like
Painted
where
a
they
bit
end
of a
up.
dystopian picture.
Exactly, they kind of
yeah.
paint a dystopian picture of like, damn, this doesn't end well for us. Like, it kind of goes too far. So I mean, if we can make it something that we kind of regulate and stuff, that's fine. But I think it's something that, as with any technology, like, we should be careful with. That's just kind of where I stand. I don't know why I'm like so like
Like
I'm very
passionate
conflicted
about it?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm very conflicted. Like, I just think it's one of those things that it's a very double-edged sword. Like, I don't know.
I think you have a point though, that like, and I think that your sentiment is shared with a lot of people, that like, you value your time in the real world, and I think if you think about it, like, that time in the real world will ultimately become more valuable because it's treasured, because with so many people being invested in the digital world, real life experiences are going to be still valued, I think. Just because of how we're built.
I don't know. I can just see people completely replacing, like, one thing VR could be used for is like, having like virtual friends or something, right? Where it kind of replaces the need for, I guess, like, in person, like, physical beings as humans.
No, I get that. In person physical beings. What are those called again?
Humans. But like, and you could have like virtual therapists, and you could, I guess, like, shape the reality that you want. But that kind of sends you down the spiral of like, I could just see us not being able to function in the real world, and like, we'd be like in our VR headsets 24/7, and like, once you take them off, you're like, oh my god, where am I? Like, what is this? Like, I need to go back to my
Forgetting
VR.
where you are. I love that. Yeah.
But I would love to hear what you think, Ricardo, because I know one of your future goals is like VR kind of world.
Yeah, I think I have a lot of thoughts on that, and it's kind of interesting. I think, at least from the perspective that you're talking about, of this could be like a disrupt for humanity potentially. I mean, we've already kind of seen the effects of virtual worlds in the past. Like, we've all known about people that literally spent 20 hours a day, on not even VR, but like MMO, right? So it could be World of Warcraft. It could be like so many of these things where people will literally replace reality with their own desired virtual world already, in spite of the fact that it's not VR, and that it's not more tangible than it would be with VR. And I think also, even just to give more of an example, VR chat is fairly popular with people, and I know some people that literally spend all of their free time in not even just like VR games, but like specifically VR chat, and they have VR chat friends and stuff. And so I feel like, yes, there will be all of that coming. I do also see people like replacing like reality with VR or AR, but I feel like at the end of the day, our basic needs will make us come out of our shells to a certain degree, where we're gonna have to interact with people and kind of know what to do, in those scenarios. But I can definitely see that being a problem, and I mean, we've seen like depictions of AR and VR not even in just like popular like American TV, like anime has a lot of those. Like Sword Art Online is like the example that probably most people that kind of know anime would think of. Axel World, Bofuri. So these examples of varying degrees where some of these are like what you were saying, like, some of these are chips implanted in people's brains that enable them to access this world, which I would presume to be a little more intrusive than maybe just putting on like a headset and some gloves to add some touch to the virtual reality. But I feel like this technology can be really helpful. Like you were saying, like education, this could enable us to connect with people. Rather than it being on Zoom, it could be in a more realistic, like 3D classroom space
True,
where you feel
yeah.
more comfortable connecting with people, right? What if, like, one of the things you were talking about is potentially, like, surgery? What if a surgeon from the other side of the world was able to, in an instant, connect to somebody that needed their help in that moment where it isn't feasible for them to take a flight necessarily and be there for a surgery, right?
So, okay, so just like clarifying things, essentially how that would work is there'd be one person on one side, like performing the surgery wearing a VR headset, and then
Yeah.
there would be a robot like actually performing the
Yeah.
surgery on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's so intense.
Yeah, and I mean, for some people would like consider that like, oh, I wouldn't want that to happen, but I feel like the best case scenario for that to happen would be in, literally like in times where there is no other way of helping. Like that's the only way that can help somebody to survive. It could be an accident, it could be a life-threatening event that has happened, and that's the only way. So I feel like VR and AR don't only allow for that, but also for creative reasons, right? Imagine architects being able to, in real time, see what their renders would look like on the actual space. What if they needed to change something? Maybe you could, having an AR, like glasses. Maybe you could see the structural integrity of a building in real time, and maybe identify faults, something that needs repair. So I feel like there's a lot of great things that can come from AR and VR, but there is definitely that potential for people to try and replace, reality with these virtual worlds that could, like you said, essentially, cater to your every need. And so, yeah, it makes it really compelling. Why would you ever leave if, you have everything you want in your perfect little world?
I do kind of want to go off and talk about education specifically a little bit more in depth, because I think that was a really interesting point that you brought up, specifically in regards to like surgery, right? Any physical task is now easily practicable with VR, right? So being a mechanic, right? Like repairing things, just practicing physical tasks in general. If you're wearing, VR gloves and a headset, it could make it so that you're able to practice all kinds of different things that you might not necessarily have access to the resources. It makes that kind of education like more equitable, right?
Yeah.
If you have VR gloves that have like haptic senses, but it's sort of like, it's more like resistance, so you can grab something and it'll actually feel like you're grabbing something, right? You would be able to then like pick up objects, move objects, grab other things like maybe a wrench or something, fix things, right? It could be really cool for training programs, because then you can't necessarily break things, right?
Yeah.
Like, it would make it would make just generally learning about mechanical and physical things so much easier.
Oh my god, that's such a good point.
That's literally the reason why they use it.
That's
For like F1 driving, right? Or like airplanes.
Yeah.
That's literally why they use simulators,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You don't want to have somebody that doesn't know how to fly a plane like actually fly a plane.
Right, like they took a test on paper and now they're certified to fly a plane.
Right, but imagine if you could put on a headset, learn the controls of major airplanes, take a test afterwards to verify in like a good environment to actually verify your skills and get a license, instead of having to, I don't know, maybe pay thousands of dollars in lessons to learn how to fly. Maybe that's your dream. Maybe that's that. So yes, it would make it like so more equitable,
right?
For people to be able to attain these things they want to do, but might not have the resources to do it otherwise. That's actually pretty great.
That's such a good point.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Like you can do, you're right. Like in terms of creative things and like trainings and education, like you can do anything.
So I actually, speaking of which, I actually totally forgot to mention this at our discussion yesterday, but I have friends who are working on a VR program for teaching conducting for musicians, right? So like conducting is one of those things where you have to like practice with musicians and have an orchestra, because you're, moving, the way that you move your hands will affect the way that the orchestra plays. But they're developing a program right now that allows you to, it tracks your hand motions and teaches you how to conduct, and the audio completely changes based on how you're moving your hands.
Whoa.
Isn't that so cool? Yeah, that's a project that some students are working on in my major, music for new media.
That's pretty sick.
Yeah, isn't it really interesting? That kind of blew me away. That's when I knew that I wanted to like pursue more in the world of programming and specifically VR.
Yeah.
Because of these sort of educational tools and training systems, right? Because now to conduct, you don't have to have a whole orchestra.
Yeah. Also, like, just more practically, like, for example, because I'm like a neuroscience major and I take like intro chem lab, and it was all online, which is not how you learn lab.
Right.
So I'm thinking like, instead of like watching videos, which is not how you're supposed to learn lab skills, like, what if we had some kind of like AR, like augmented reality, where you could like somehow you like on your desk or something, you could like project like, I don't know, like a lab setup, or even like in VR, like have like haptic sensors, and you could like sense like, picking up a pipette and like filling a tube and like everything else. I think that would have been really cool, because that way you're still getting the lab experience even from home. So I think in terms of education, I think it's really promising. And also like for like scientists, like biochemists or whatever, who are studying like molecules and stuff, you can like get into molecules and like see it and like in 3D, like all around you, and like immerse yourself in like the atomic level even. And then also in terms of like medicine, you get like anatomy. You know how, medical students, they have to like dissect cadavers and stuff.
Yeah.
And let's say, for some reason you don't have access to a cadaver or something, you could have like a 3D cadaver in virtual reality, and obviously it's not exactly the same, but you're still simulating that experience in VR where you're dissecting, you're cutting open the skin and whatever else. I don't know what they do.
Yeah.
I'm a little
no, it's
blood
all
is
good.
a little scary for me, but yeah, I think that'd be really interesting. I think there's a lot of, I think I've kind of trashed VR, but I think there's so many really cool things. Oh, one more thing.
Yeah, sure.
VR and AR, I don't know if anyone's heard of phantom limb pain, but it's basically where like if you've had a limb amputated, so like let's say your arm, it's basically you have this phantom sensation. In other words, you have pain in the arm, even though like your arm's not there, so you're kind of like imagining it's still there. And there's this thing called mirror therapy, where basically you put your functioning limb like in front of a mirror, and then it looks like both sides, right and left, are like full limbs.
Yeah, so if you're sitting on a table, it's like you put the mirror directly like in front of you, sort of like so it's so that the mirror is facing your arm, the arm that's on the table, and then so that you can't see where your arm isn't.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so then you
exactly.
can see it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I would definitely look up like an image of that. But you could also have it in like VR, where you could somehow like simulate your other arm and like have like a full body in VR. And I could see that working like mirror therapy, where it can alleviate the phantom limb pain, because you're actually sensing stuff. I mean, it would be interesting. I don't know how you would solve the problem of like holding a controller or something, but like maybe it could somehow sense. I don't know. How would, you guys are the CS people, how would we solve that?
Oh my goodness, I have no idea. But I'll give a good guesstimate. I think as far as like controlling a phantom arm in VR, you would have to have some sort of neural implant, which then goes over to you, Mr. Neuro Major. But I wouldn't, I feel like this is way, way off in the future, but you could have a neural implant that connects to that part of the brain that controls the arm, right? And then you would be able to control a second arm in this virtual reality, right? And be able to feel an arm again. Going into sort of back to what you were talking about like having some sort of neural implant that would allow you to experience an entirely different world that isn't this one, kind of like hallucinate it, right? Or dream it, or just have an experience like that. People who have lost limbs would then be able to have limbs in this world. Isn't that crazy? Their
That's
entire
really cool.
perception of their body could completely change.
Oh, that reminds me actually. Okay, so apparently I think this is a thing. I might be wrong, so don't quote me on this. But I believe for some people that lose mobility in their limbs, even though they still have them, it might be due to like connections in the brain not functioning correctly, right? And so what sometimes they'll do is try to like re-stimulate those parts in the brain, because technically they're still there, the limbs are still there. You just kind of have to like reconnect those things together so that the person is at least able to regain some mobility. So maybe even through VR, they might like, you know, with a chip implant or whatever, they might be actually be able to do that in more cases rather than going to actual therapy to do it. You might be able to stimulate different limbs in a VR world,
Right.
reconnecting those, you know, parts of your brain so that you are able to gain some mobility back in the cases where you just lose it for maybe, I don't know, an accident or something happening.
Wow, that's so trippy to think about.
Dang. I guess this is going to the recent news of Facebook changing its name to Meta.
Yeah.
But you know, the whole idea of the metaverse and basically social media transitioning to something like a virtual reality world, like the metaverse. What do you guys think about, like, is that is this, because Facebook is betting big on, or Meta, sorry,
Yeah, no, you're
Meta
all
is
good.
is betting big on this. Like, the whole name change thing is kind of showing that, you know, maybe social media isn't the future anymore, right? Maybe it's actually like virtual reality and interactions with actual like avatars and stuff. So
I think
don't
that like us looking at Facebook changing its name to Meta and the direction that Facebook is taking with social media, it's kind of a weird awakening as to what social media really is. Like, I never thought of it as being a world, right? Like I never thought of social media as being its own digital universe. I just sort of thought that it was a web page within a physical existing universe, as opposed to like it being its own universe with its own rules. But if you think about it, it kind of is that. Like, there are its own rules, regulations, currency, if you think of likes in that way, right? It's, which is really, really kind of scary for me, but it's also, it's just where we're going, right? Like, it just feels like the direction that we're headed in, which is, it's inevitable that we're going to head that way. So I think that I personally am going to spend less time dwelling on like, and being curmudgeon-y and saying, back in my day, we didn't, and sort of trying to embrace it and see where it takes us, because it could have potential to be really something that connects us on a deeper level. However, I think Facebook is scary and evil.
Yeah.
So I somehow
say.
feel like that's not going to happen without some or a lot of repercussions.
yeah, Facebook kind of worries me. Like, in
They're
the
just
end,
like the most evil company there is.
I know. I
Mark
mean,
Zuckerberg is sketchy, dude.
Yeah.
lizard man.
Yeah, right.
I mean, a genius.
A
A
genius.
genius
I
is
don't
a
wanna-
man.
But like, in the end, the problem with these companies is they're not altruistic, right? They're not trying to. I mean, maybe as a side effect of them trying to benefit themselves and profit and monetize, they can say, oh, the side effect is we connect people or whatever. But like, in the end, it's really just about them making money, and like they're gonna go to whatever end they can to monetize and advertise and whatever. So that's what kind of worries me, is it's a corporate kind of I mean, that's the same thing with Instagram and
Right.
Facebook and every other social media, but with something this
Of this scale.
of this scale, yeah, exactly. It's just, it's like so exciting, but it's also like Facebook, you know?
Right, yeah.
So
I think like
Yeah.
going back to what I was saying about in sort of the very beginning of this conversation about a virtual world being completely controlled by humans and where humans are God. I'm not sure that I'd want Mark Zuckerberg to be the god of the
Yeah.
virtual world, and that's kind of how people view him right? Like
Yeah.
he basically has ultimate control over all social media,
he
right?
does.
I mean, he owns Facebook and Instagram. That's basically a monopoly right there.
Yeah, this is reminding me of The Social Dilemma, which I don't know if either of you have watched, but it's really worth watching. I think it's like a free Netflix feature on YouTube right now, like the full
Yeah.
documentary. I just watched it like a few weeks ago, and the algorithms and like just the intention behind social media, it's very like sadistic, like it's dark.
Yeah.
Like it's just, they're just trying to, I mean, in the end it's about maximizing like user time on the product. And one of the quotes that stood out to me was, if you're not like directly paying for the product, you are the product. Like your time and your attention, that's the product, because they're going to be sending you like advertising and everything to monetize the model. So yeah, but I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. I'm excited because this is kind of like, it's also exciting that like a big company like Facebook with so much money and so much
Yeah.
resources and so many brilliant people is doing this, because it's just going to push us in that direction. It's like,
I think we're in
Yeah.
a spot. I think you make a good point. Like, we're in a space. Like, I'm excited because right now we're in a space where people are consumed by social media but not connecting in a way that is valued. So, if we can sort of leverage the fact that people are already engaged in social media and make that time spent more meaningfully, I think that is what is exciting about it to me, because right now we're already spending so much time on social media. So, and like I said, it's not doing a very good job of connecting us, right? Like, it's very easy to misinterpret a text or like paint a perfect picture of your life, right? Like on social media.
True.
So I think that something like the metaverse has potential to allow us to engage in a virtual world while making more meaningful connections. So that's why I'm excited.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons to be both very excited but also skeptical. I think this goes back to my quote, or my new phrase of optimistic skepticism.
Yeah, right.
Like, be wary of the technology, but like also embrace it for its like potential benefits. So yeah, with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode of VR AR. I found it really interesting. I'm I don't know. I'm like a mix of nerves and excitement right now.
Same. Like, there's a lot of like anticipation.
Yeah, I feel
waiting
like
for this.
we're kind of entering like a new era of just what does it mean to interact with others, right?
Yeah.
It's just a whole new playing field. So I'm very excited, also a little nervous, but yeah, think about like what benefits or what potential uses you think VR could have that we didn't mention, because I'm sure there are many things that you could do with VR that we haven't even like touched upon. But with that, thank you, Max. Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you, Nicholas.
And we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.